Hi, in this video I will show you how I replaced the fuel pump module on my 2009 Jeep Patriot.
A while ago I filled up the fuel tank of my Jeep, and then, when I arrived home, I noticed the vehicle smelled like gasoline near the fuel tank. So I parked the vehicle in front of my garage to inspect it. Because the fuel tank was full, I was quite sure the fuel leak was caused by a crack on top of the fuel pump module. When inspecting or replacing this kind of fuel pump, the interior of the vehicle must be well ventilated for safety. To unfasten the brackets of the rear seat cushion, these two Torx screws have to be unscrewed. This is the T55 Torx bit socket I used. It went well even if the threads were rusty. Next I freed the retaining brackets and I removed the cushion. Here I show the cushion when it was partially removed. This is how it looked like without the cushion. Then I removed the sound insulator mat. There are two plastic covers. This one is located over the fuel pump module. My vehicle is not equipped with a secondary fuel tank sending unit, so I didn't have to inspect anything under the second cover. This is the top of the fuel pump module, and this is the lock ring holding the fuel pump module in place. The ring was very dirty, so I cleaned it a bit to remove some dirt and debris. Before disconnecting the fuel pump, it is required to release the pressure from the fuel system. So I disconnected the electrical connector to prevent the fuel pump from pumping any fuel when starting the engine. Then I started the engine and I waited a few seconds until it stalled. I tried it again to make sure the pressure was low enough so it wouldn't start. Next I removed the ignition key and I disconnected the negative battery cable. Before disconnecting the fuel line from the fuel pump, I removed a bit more dirt. Because the lock ring was very rusty, I applied some penetrating fluid to ease the removal. The locking tabs of the blue retaining clip must be depressed in order to disengage the fuel line quick connector. When this fuel line connector is removed, the retaining clip must also be removed separately. If it's in good condition, it can be reused later. The lock ring can be undone with a compatible fuel tank lock ring tool or a suitable brass punch. My brass punch was not suitable, so I took an hour to fabricate my own lock ring tool with leftover steel parts. To obtain a good leverage when rotating the locking tool, I decided to use a 3/4 inch drive ratchet with a drive adapter. I made this illustration to better show the position of the fuel pump module when it is held with the lock ring. I moved the fuel line aside to protect it, then I inserted the tips of the tool in these two holes. After, I rotated the clock ring in a counterclockwise motion to unlock it. As you can see, the lock ring was not in good condition. It was covered with a lot of rust on both sides. The rust buildup was probably one of the reasons why the plastic edge eventually broke. This is the O-ring seal located under the upper edge of the module. I cleaned up the surfaces around the top of the module to see if something else was damaged. Not long after, when the cleanup was sufficient enough, I pulled up the fuel pump module. Here you can see the quantity of fuel that was left in the module reservoir. To show how to reduce the risk of spilling some gasoline inside the vehicle while removing the module, I made this short demonstration on my workbench. If this reservoir is slowly tilted on this side, the fuel can flow into the small chamber. Then when the fuel is in the chamber, it slowly drains out from the two small holes located at the bottom. This portion of the draining takes about 1 minute. Next, when the level of fuel inside the reservoir is low enough, it's easy to remove the fuel pump module without spilling the remaining fuel. After, it's simple to transfer the rest of the fuel in the fuel tank with a large funnel. The old O-ring seal must be removed and discarded. While I was waiting for the new fuel pump module to be delivered, it was an opportunity to recondition the lock ring. I sanded the flat surfaces and I spray painted the ring. While the paint was drying, I cleaned the fuel tank seal area to properly sit the new O-ring seal. Not long after I received the new fuel pump module, I installed the new seal, then the new module. The plastic tab of the fuel pump module must also be positioned like that. I loosely installed the lock ring by hand. Here you can see the plastic tab behind the lock ring. At that moment, I used my locking ring tool to rotate and lock the locking ring. This procedure compresses the O-ring and seals the fuel tank. After a basic inspection, I reconnected the fuel line connector, the electrical connector, the negative battery cable, and I refitted the air inlet. The next step was to activate the pump and pressurize the fuel system. I turned the key to the on position for about 5 seconds twice without cranking the engine. For safety, I checked around the lock ring and the fuel pump module. As expected, there was no fuel leak. I considered it was safe, so I started the engine. I checked again for any leaks and it was fine. To certify the result, I drove the vehicle for about 15 minutes and it confirmed that there was no leak. Finally, I refitted the plastic cover, the insulator mat, and the rear seat cushion.
The Jeep Patriot fuel pump lock ring system is also used on other Jeep, Dodge and Chrysler vehicles, so in some cases the procedure should be the same.